Good afternoon. I'm Mary Stennis-Wilborn from the Food Co-op Initiative, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today. Today we are talking about the Monadnock Food Co-op case study, and this is a really exciting one. They've been open a couple of years. All you startups out there should really enjoy it. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. Food Co-op Initiative is a non-profit organization dedicated to providing support and resources to help new groups start food co-ops all over the country. We are helping 79 co-ops, open grocery stores, are working with more than 130 startups, communities that are organizing at the moment. We are here to help you get started if you're starting a co-op. Get you down the right path and find the help you need along the way. If you are just getting started, please call us because we are really full of ideas of how you can get down to the nitty-gritty of starting a food co-op. You can find our contact information or sign up on our website at fci.coop or foodcoopinitiative.coop. Our work is supported by grants from the USDA, National Cooperative Bank, National Cooperative Grocers, the Cooperative Foundation, and Cooperative Fund of New England. We also are supported by donations from co-ops and these members just like you. Thanks to all of you. We could not do it without you. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available soon on our foodcoopinitiative.coop site or as well as on our YouTube channel. We have an extensive library of previously recorded webinars and topics that range from what to do first right through hiring a general manager, and we hope that you'll take advantage of them. Be sure to sign up for our next webinar, which will be held the third Tuesday in January. I'm sorry, I don't have a title yet, but we'll put it up on Facebook and our website as soon as we do. If you have questions during the webinar, please ask them either on the YouTube page, or you can email info@fci.coop, or call our main number as listed on our website. We will be happy to channel those through to our presenters, probably at the end of the presentation. Many of the questions might come up during there and be answered as well. If you have questions after, just send us an email anytime. Now I would like to turn this over to Bonnie and Michael to introduce themselves and tell their story. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mary. This is Bonnie Hudspeth, and I am Membership and Outreach Manager for Neighboring Food Co-op Association. I was the project manager for Monadnock Food Co-op in its early organizing phases, and this guy is...
Hi, I'm Michael Faber, and I'm the general manager of the Monadnock Food Co-op here in Keene, New Hampshire.
And so we decided to convene at Monadnock Food Co-op headquarters in the general manager's office to do this webinar together. So today what we're going to be talking about, if you could advance to the next slide, Joel, is we're going to do a brief intro, a couple background stats about Monadnock Food Co-op, and then we're going to talk about 3 solid decisions that we made during the organizing phase that really helped the project succeed and get the doors open. We're going to talk a little bit about, as staff and board members, how to prepare to hire your general manager, and then really focus on the incoming general manager's perspective and what the first jobs are when you hire your general manager. Then we're going to wrap up by talking about some lessons learned and turn it over to you all to get your questions. So just basically, we're really not going to delve into all the steps that we did to start a co-op, but one thing that I think is important is that we followed the 4 cornerstones and 3 stages development model, which gave us some sense of a direction to go. And even though all the stages didn't match up perfectly, it gave a really good help in helping us create a timeline and move the project forward efficiently. So this, the 1 through 11 steps that we took really aligned with the How to Start a Co-op manual that's available on Food Co-op Initiative's website. So it's a great resource to use. And we found it to be really helpful in helping us create a timeline and roadmap for moving the project forward efficiently.
So this is just some overview stats of our project. So we started, we had first meetings back in 2007, and 3 years later we incorporated and formed our first board of directors. And then 3 years after that, on April 3rd, 2013, our store opened. And we opened with 7,800 of retail square footage and a total square footage of our building of 13,000 square feet. The first year projected sales of our co-op were $7 million, but our actual first year sales came in a little bit below that at $6.4 million. But you'll see in year 2 and year 3, sales really bounced back, and we saw a really strong growth, on average 40% growth in our second year, and we're hoping to hit just a little under $10 million in sales for our third year, which is actually above our pro forma's projection.
Great. And Michael will talk a little bit later about some of the impacts that this strong growth has allowed the co-op to have in the community, which is really exciting. But backing up to the organizing phase, when I was project manager and when our group consisted of a bunch of folks in the community and myself who had no experience with operations, retail management, grocery management, or what a co-op was, you know, thinking about some of the solid decisions we made to move the project along successfully, what we really focused on highlighting was having a clearly defined organizational structure, the board's decision to hire a full-time project manager to move the project forward, and finding and embracing co-op expertise, both through hiring consultants and connecting with neighboring food co-ops, were all paramount to success in the organizing phase. So I'm going to delve into them a little bit. Whenever you're ready, Joel, to move forward. I'm good to go. Cool. So having a clearly defined organizational structure was so important to being efficient in our organizing. So this was the general structure that we had, and it took us a while to figure this out. So in the beginning, we were a steering committee. I was on the steering committee along with 11 or 12 other community members. I realized I wanted to serve as project manager, so when it came time to form the board, I was on the board selection committee. I kind of withdrew my name from being on the board and helped to form the first board of directors, including the structure and putting together some of the pieces in place. And I think what was really important in defining this structure is outlining responsibility and authority and understanding decision making, because there are millions of decisions you have to make in the organizing phase, and by having a concise and agreed upon organizational structure, it gave me the authority as project manager to know what I was supposed to be focusing on and what decisions I was able to make by myself and what decisions the board was responsible for. So you'll notice there's a board committee. You know, the governance committee is just one example of a committee that is from the board committee. And then you can see under project manager, I oversaw 3 committees within the community, and these were just kind of placeholders. We had more committees at some place: finance and facilities, marketing and volunteer and outreach. But one of the most important things in having this structure is you'll notice there are some signs that come up that you need a clearly defined organizational structure when, for example, there's lack of clarity on who is responsible for what tasks in your organizing and who is responsible, or how decisions get made. I also think it's really important practice for your board of directors, which will at some point be overseeing an operational grocery store, to practice governing and helping to oversee a general manager. So they should be really putting some of these skill sets into place, practicing with a project manager.
And just as another resource that is out there on the I think it's the Cooperative Board Leadership Development Library, the CBLD library. They have a policy template for startup food co-ops, and in that template, towards the bottom, they actually have some draft charters of the various committees, which might be a good starting point in helping to just, again, sort of define some of the structure in the committees and the roles and responsibilities of each of them.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think it also is important. It helps define and clarify roles. Like, for example, a board member could also be on a committee. The board is overseeing the project manager, and the project manager is overseeing the committees. So sometimes a board member will be on one of your committees. We seem to be having a fire alarm in the co-op right now for some reason.
Yeah, it's just a test alarm. It'll be off in a second here. Really apologize about that as part of the webinar here.
So the board's decision to hire a project manager was incredibly important in the organizing stage, because having someone that is dedicated, and the first thing they think about when they wake up every morning is how they're going to get the doors open on the store. Also, having someone that takes point, that the community, it's kind of the liaison to the community, and someone who can spend more hours than a volunteer board member is really important. So, and usually the way this works is increasing responsibility and increasing amount of hours over time. So when I started as project manager in the early phases, I was being paid for 5 hours a week, which was peanuts, and it was nowhere near the amount that I was working. So the rest was volunteer time. But eventually, in the last year of my working for Monadnock Food Co-op as project manager, I was paid full-time to be project manager, which was really important because that was during the capital campaign, and that was during getting our membership numbers up to 1,000 member owners by opening, and overseeing a lot of supporting the board in their structure and setting up policies. So way too much work for volunteers. So, as project manager, one of my main responsibilities throughout the project was managing the timeline and momentum, and also developing and managing the membership campaign. In co-op development, a lot rests on how many member owners you have. At your co-op will decide at a certain amount of member owners you're going to do a feasibility study. At a certain amount you're going to release the member equity. And so that was sort of the basis of the work that I did. But also coordinating committees, as we showed in the organizational structure, managing communications, which could in itself be a full-time job, as I'm sure a lot of you have experienced, especially as the co-op gets closer to opening. There's a lot of interest from farmers, from community members, both happy and angry about the co-op, the concept of a co-op. And then also, as the only staff for the co-op in these early phases, empowering others, like empowering and training volunteers, and holding them accountable, both in terms of the board members, the committee members, and volunteers.
And just to reiterate the importance of that, for each store's development process, there's usually a benchmark that's established working with professional organizers about when is that right time to bring on a project manager. And again, just to reiterate what Bonnie said, that defining that point and acting and moving to do that, to bring that resource on to move the project forward was huge for us.
Right, and it's hard. It's hard to spend any member equity. A lot of co-ops feel very nervous about that, but it gets to a point in development where you're like, oh, this project will not move forward efficiently or at all if we don't hire someone. So it probably will come up naturally. You'll start to realize that, but just having some of that check-in and planning ahead for when you hope to hire your first staff, even if it's outreach manager or a different name, that's really important to put into your timeline. So one of the most important takeaways beyond, in being project manager was understanding with clarity that there are two different projects in starting a co-op. One is organizing the structure for a democratic association, and the other is setting up a grocery store. And the biggest lesson I learned as project manager was to push all operations decisions as far into the future as possible. So that, and it took me a while to learn that. from a very early stage, you will be getting questions from potential member owners, from farmers, about products you'll be carrying, about what you're going to put on the shelf. And I've seen startups try to respond to these questions and give answers to the direct questions, which is incredibly awkward because you don't have the knowledge to answer the questions, and I think it puts a lot of stress, undue stress on organizers, when the real answer should be, hey, we're not in the role to make that decision. The general manager will make that decision in the future, and have some way to communicate and a way to say we can put your name in a file, or we can save your information and put a spreadsheet together, but that's about all you're going to be answering. So an example of this is, rather than deciding who's going to be supplying your co-op, as a founding board of directors, your decision, you'd be better served by creating ends policies for an end statement for the co-op that will state the outcomes that the co-op will create in the community and in the world, that you will then use to help oversee the general manager when you hire them. I know as a founding board of directors, you don't want to let go of your vision. You want to preserve your vision about what the co-op will be, and really a good way to do that is by setting up the organizational structure so that someone that's well-trained and an expert can then put into motion the vision and values that you have for your co-op. Anything you'd add?
That's great.
Okay.
Bonnie, if I can interject something here.
Sure.
We're having a little trouble with the YouTube question area, so if anyone has questions, would you please just email them to info@fci.coop. Thank you.
Great. Another, this is kind of the third piece, the third aha moment in our organizing phase that was really important, was finding and embracing co-op expertise. So, it was really crucial that we made the decision to hire co-op consultants for our market study, for helping us legally incorporate and draw up legal documents for our member loan campaign, and for getting support in our organizational development, putting together the first policy documents, helping our board transition from a pre-operations board to a board that's overseeing operations. And so we really, throughout the development phase, we relied heavily on our relationships with consultants. In the beginning, Food Co-op Initiative and CDS Consulting Co-op, and further along in the development timeline, NCG, the development arm of National Co-op Grocers. So,
and just to add to that, a lot of the projects are projects that you're going to do once and only once. So, for example, for us, our member loan campaign was a huge project, and it was critical that we planned and executed that piece really well. So that's just another example of a component of our project that we did reach out and got some professional expertise and help us plan and execute that well. That paid huge dividends in that we were able to exceed our goal in fundraising, raising $800,000 for the project.
Right, and so we, at first, the first decisions we made to hire consultants with expertise in co-ops was their sort of sticker price shock, because it seems like for a group when you have all these community members with very little in their pockets, fundraising thousands of dollars for a market study and for these different studies seems like a lot. But the more that we relied upon co-op expertise and hired consultants, the more we realized it was saving us a ton of time and money, if you translate it into how many years the project would have dragged along without having that support. So, for example, when it came time to launch our member loan campaign, we put money into the member loan campaign budget to make sure that we could hire a consultant. And we were lucky enough to work with Tammy Bauer. She saved us so much time and helped us execute a successful campaign. And in addition, we worked a lot with co-ops, nearby co-ops, just for peer learning and support, and shared consulting. We really didn't do too much of it, but I love this concept. If a nearby co-op is flying a consultant in to do some, to do store design, for example, being able to know that and for that co-op to offer, hey, there's a nearby startup that also that's going to need store design, and syncing up that timeline, you could actually save money for, save the cost of the consultant's flight. So that's just something to think about. If you do have nearby established co-ops, get in touch with them months before on your timeline and say, hey, in April we're going to start doing our store planning. Are you bringing in a store design consultant? So just to see how you can tag team on and share some costs, which for an established co-op, it's probably exciting for them to be able to give you that support.
Yeah, and another component of that we did was sort of identified a co-op in our region who we thought and felt would be a really good model for us to try to replicate their success. And so for our project, we selected River Valley Market in Northampton, Massachusetts, which had opened a few years before us, and offer in terms of just their floor plan, their offerings, their success, just seemed like a great model for us. So, for example, they're one of the few co-ops in the region that had a full-service meat and seafood department, and that was something that we had identified as something that we felt like would be important for our project. And so we researched their success. We used Pete Hodgson, who's a CDS consultant, who helped develop and create their meat and seafood department, and he worked with us to sort of replicate that here, and it's been a huge success for us.
Yes, and also I would say no matter what phase of organizing that you're in, get onto Facebook, Twitter, whatever forms of media you use, and follow all of the co-ops that you can find, especially other startups across the country, because you might find a startup that's doing exceptionally well in their membership campaign, whereas your strength is on your board development. So having those peers that you can share expertise with was really helpful. In my case, there was folks that were just starting to think about starting a food co-op in Manchester, New Hampshire, and they're now have over 1,000 member owners and are progressing really well to open a store there. But having that peer support was really important to me because I felt really isolated when I was the only staff. So I think that's an important step. And then another thing that I would say about hiring co-op expertise and using co-op consultants is that it's really going to matter when you do your member loan campaign, when you're putting together your business plan, if you're going to your city and asking for an appropriation or support, being able to demonstrate that you're using expertise with a track record of opening successful food co-ops is really, really important. And so that's just something that when we went to city council meeting asking for an appropriation to support our market study, being able to share the success that these consultants had, all the successful food co-ops that we could point to, that was really crucial in getting support, especially when you have lack of credibility early on and you still need to prove yourself. Okay, so these were, doing these three things was really important in our success early on. And one of the transition things I want to talk about here as we think about you've done your organizing, you've raised your capital, and you're thinking about hiring your general manager. One thing I would say is think about it as early as you can. Our goal was to have a general manager in place 1 year before opening the doors on our store. And that was an ambitious goal, but we felt it was important, and we also knew that a lot of the questions that needed to be answered, we didn't want to be answering because we weren't equipped to do those decisions. So one of the things that we had done was thought early about what structures do we want to have in place that will make this store attractive to a general manager. So we worked with Cooperative Board Leadership Development Program to give education to the founding board members, and also work with a consultant who could help the board set up our first policies and set up the policy governance structure so that we would have that in place by the time we put out the general manager job description, so that they would know they're coming into an organization that has a governance structure. They know how they're going to be held accountable, and they know the structure for management. And another thing that we did was put together a general manager hiring committee, and that, worked on that early so that we could find a good general manager. So there was a board committee that was focusing on, that comprised of a local HR person and a board member and I think a couple other community members, and also we got support from the NCG development folks that we were working with at the time in finding and attracting a Dynamo general manager who's sitting here right now. So I thought it would be interesting for Michael to share from his perspective. If you're going to take a risk to come and be a general manager at a startup, what are some of the things that you're going to look at for this startup group that will help make the deal a little bit sweeter for you?
So, and just a little bit more about me. Prior to coming to Monadnock, I had was in the position of general manager at another food co-op in the region, and wanted to move to this region to be closer to my family. So, in thinking about what made this opportunity attractive to me and really a good opportunity were just, again, that there were just clear lines of responsibility and accountability in place, and that from my experience with interviewing with the board and asking them questions and understanding how they functioned, that they had already begun to put in place policy governance. So I knew that that just the lines of again, responsibility and accountability would be very clear, and I would have the authority that I would need to be able to put all the tools and systems in place to establish a successful co-op. Another, I think, really important thing for me was just that there were professional resources that were utilized along the way, so that key decisions that were going to affect my ability to run a successful store have been made thoughtfully. So things like size of the store, the location, the parking, and there are many examples where of other food co-ops where unfortunately some of those decisions were not made well, and it ultimately and one particular example here with the Troy Food Co-op in Troy, New York, they just made a bad decision around the location of their site, and they didn't follow or utilize some resources in the process, and it ended up with that project failing and them having to close their door not too long after opening. So there are sadly real examples of those issues not going well. So again, those things in the site and the plan for this project were well thought through, and I had the chance to look at some of those decisions in my consideration for the position. Lastly, what was also extremely helpful was just that there were professional resources that I could work with moving forward. I knew there were still a lot of difficult decisions to be made, and the Monadnock Food Co-op Board had established a development contract with the National Co-op Grocers, and that contract ended up being a huge help for me. I had a partner, a professional partner who knew a retail grocery inside and out to help me sort of boots on the ground, go through the whole hiring and store opening process together. So some of the things that I initially got involved in as I came on was just some of the first things: set up the co-op for employees, basic things like payroll, workers' comp, the employee handbook. We established the financial record keeping and reporting for the store. I took over at that point managing the startup budget, including our sources and uses budget, and oversaw our equipment purchase and installation and the budget associated with that. There were several negotiations I was involved with, both the architect and the developer, which included finalizing and signing a 20-year lease for our store. We worked out to be a really good fit for us to work with a developer who built this, and so that we didn't have to invest all the capital up front in purchasing and developing a site. So we're just leasing. We lease this site here with options to buy. Just oversee a variety of just details with the construction project. We later worked on the store branding and the interior decor and messaging, and again I worked with the NCG's marketing department on that, which paid huge dividends for our store. We had lastly a pre-opening training plan, and we hired to that plan and put all our new staff through this training plan to get them up to speed for the opening of the store. And one thing I haven't even mentioned yet on this list is just the product selection, and a lot of that came into account after the department managers were hired. Many of them were hired roughly about 60 days before the store opened, and they spent a large chunk of their first month on the job putting together some of the product selection and offerings for the store. And I think that's sort of a really good example, just because I sometimes get calls from other various startup groups that might be in the early organizing phase, and they're telling me about their plans of deciding on products they're going to carry. And I think, just back to a point that Bonnie made earlier, it's just trying to really understand the decisions that need to be made at various points along the project is really critical, because there are a lot of examples, and at certain points we were susceptible to this as well, where you get it's sort of like candy in a candy shop. You get sucked into these decisions that just really don't need to be made, and are best served by waiting for the appropriate time in the co-op's development to take those projects on. So with all that said, again, we've been open it'll be 3 years this coming April, and so we've had a huge impact on our community, and the store's been a great success. Just to recap that, we're sourcing products from over 175 different local farms and producers within 100 miles of the store. We've put in a huge effort to work with local food producers, and as a result, we're recently awarded the Local Food Champion Award by the County Conservation District. The staff that we employ here keeps going up. We're actually closer to 80 now. We paid out almost $2 million in wages and benefits just last fiscal year. And just about a year after opening, we actually reached our break-even point, which was a couple of years ahead of plan for us. And as a result of our financial success, we were able to implement a livable wage program for full-time staff after 1 year to get them all up to $11.55 an hour. And we were also able to just make various improvements in our building during the construction phase, but we're also working on other projects now. Recently, we hired a sustainability coordinator, and we're in the process of installing a rooftop solar, and also a composting, getting set up to work with a commercial composting facility. So just to recap a few of the lessons learned that that sort of stand out for us, hopefully that have come through in our presentation here. Really critical just to get the right people on the bus. I think we've all had experiences where we've been in meetings where somebody will drag you into conversations or topics or subjects or be complaining, whatever the situation is. It's just really important. There's a limited amount of time that you can retain the energy and the focus to putting a food co-op together and getting it open. So every meeting where you're pulling people together is crucially important, and making sure that time gets utilized well. And one of the keys to that is really just having the right people on board from the very beginning. Secondly, just again, is the clearly defined organizational structure so that there's good empowerment, good accountability. That you do hire a project manager as soon as you're able to, guided by various your planning process and how many member owners you feel like you need to have to make that step. To find and embrace the co-op expertise out there that has been enormously helpful for us along our way. Avoid costly distractions. I recently presented a workshop at a startup food conference last year, and I sort of asked the audience what, if any, distractions had any of them gotten themselves involved in, and one of the participants answered by telling me that they were presented this opportunity to open like a community kitchen. And he asked me if he thought that was a good idea, and I said, well, it doesn't. My response was, it doesn't sound like you're opening a food co-op anymore. And he sort of paused, and I think sort of realized that while it sounded as like an attractive opportunity for him, it really wasn't what they set out to do. And there are just a lot of opportunities like that along the way, and it really does require discipline to keep focused on the project that the board and the community set out to create. And then set yourself up to attract a really good general manager. There are really strong both store managers, general managers at co-ops across the country, and many of them are looking for new and opportunities and other opportunities for them to grow. And lastly, just have fun along the way. We definitely made it a point to go out and celebrate the success that we had, whether it was reaching a threshold of the number of members that we reached, or other various points along our path that were important to us. We found various ways of doing that. Some as simple as just going out to the brew pub for a beer and a good dinner, but it's obviously something that's important to do along the way. That's the last slide, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think we wanted to go through this relatively quickly, and I realize it's probably really overwhelming to hear, especially if you're in the earlier stages of organizing. But these questions apparently these are the types of topics that staff at Food Co-op Initiative were thinking that sharing that story could be helpful. So we're really interested in hearing your questions now, digging into some of these topics a little bit more.
Hi, this is
and our contact, on one of the slides we have our contact, both my contact information and Michael's contact, so maybe that could be shared. Oh, there we go. If you guys have additional questions, feel free to shoot us an email, either one of us.
Okay, we do have quite a few questions that have come in. We'll start out with the question about timeline. Your timeline showed it took over 6 years to get the store to opening. Is that unusually long, and how can we shorten the time frame to be half that or less?
We were just talking about that over lunch. 6 years, we felt like it was unbearably long. It felt like it was really dragging out. But what we're seeing is that there's a lot of startups around in this region that have been organizing for over that amount of time already, and still have a couple years, I would say, left before they get their doors open. So I would say two things that would help you easily cut that. One of them is just when this project was started, when I was putting together, I didn't mention this, but I had just gotten my master's degree from a local university that's in the community, and I was new to the community. I didn't really know anyone, and so when I went out into the community to start to form the steering committee and have one-on-one coffee shop conversations and do relationship building, I spent almost a year doing that, raising the funds for the market study, getting out there, talking to people, because at the time I was 25, and I had problems with credibility. People didn't know who I was. I looked really young and inexperienced, and so I had to kind of prove myself a little bit in the community and also build relationships with people. So that, I would say, added an additional year that didn't need to be on that timeline. If you are living in the community for a while where you're organizing. Another thing that I think would have helped is that what's amazing is that even back in 2007, which is fairly recently, we wanted to do a community meeting and show a 5-minute video about what a food co-op is and pictures of other food co-ops, and we literally could not find anything online. When you go online now to Food Co-op Initiative's website, CDS Consulting Co-op, National Co-op Grocers, there are hundreds of videos that you can find that make it so much easier to do co-op education in the community. We spent so much time that we shouldn't have had to because those resources simply weren't available, and that's just an exciting step for the co-op community that folks produce these videos, and now there's so many more resources available so that you can send links to send people to other successful food co-ops, give them 5-minute videos at all of your community presentations, showing examples of what other food co-ops are like and getting the community really excited about it. So, and also from what I hear, Food Co-op Initiative has just revamped and will soon be releasing an updated version of how to start a co-op manual that's in sync with the 4 cornerstones and 3 stages model, and that would have been like the best present ever if that had landed in our laps early in the organizing phase. So I think just making use of the cutting edge resources that are coming out would have helped us move that timeline along much faster in the early stages.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, we completely agree. 6 years is too long, and I think, as Bonnie's already mentioned, there are a lot more resources that are available now than there were even then. And lastly, I just think, as I hope mentioned on some level here, just being really disciplined about your approach to your project and looking over the steps along the way and just really understanding every meeting where you are and what you're trying to accomplish, so that you can avoid some of these really time-consuming distractions and really move the project on efficiently.
Right, and also I think key to this that I forgot to mention is a timeline. I spent a ridiculous amount of time trying to parse together a timeline and have a document that was way overcomplicated, a project management document. You really just need an Excel spreadsheet with a timeline, and there's a lot of great examples of those out there that did not exist when we were looking for that resource. And so to adopt a timeline early on and update it at every single board meeting that you have is a really helpful tool, because a timeline that outlines your membership numbers, your site work, all the stuff that you're doing right now, which now thanks to Michael's perspective, shouldn't be operations decisions, and I think that had we known that early on, it would have saved us a lot of time as well.
Oh, great. And you're right, we will have that new version of the Food Co-op Initiative Guide to Starting a Food Co-op out early next year. It's being formatted for publication right now.
Awesome.
So another question. We have another co-op that we could visit. Should we be asking them for help? And who should we ask and when?
Let's see. I think I would say start early and start often. But I think.
I think it's just echo.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So just to elaborate on that a little bit more, which is that one of the things that we've acknowledged along the way is just that it's actually a lot easier for a neighboring or regional co-op to open a food co-op for you. So a good place to start is actually going to a neighboring or regional co-op and asking them if they would consider opening a co-op in your community, and that is probably one of the easiest and most efficient ways to go about having a store serve your community. And if that opportunity doesn't exist, by all means, at least starting that conversation to see in what ways they might be willing to support your project, and also just learning from them about the various things that they do well, and how and what elements might be of use to you as you go through the process.
And I would, in terms of who do you reach out to, I would reach out to the general manager first, and they will be able to direct you to the most appropriate staff based on your needs. I would also say consider how to be a good mentee. You're looking for a mentor. So, for example, having one point person from your group communicating with that co-op is much easier for the co-op staff to know, okay, this is Bonnie's going to be the person that's harassing me from Monadnock Food Co-op startup, when it was a startup. And also, ask the general manager or whoever it is once you've established that relationship, what their capacity is. Do you have time for a monthly check-in call? If so, I would go there. Having a monthly check-in and where that person can ask the general manager or what staff you're working with will be able to ask you questions, answer your questions, and provide support. But first, really just asking them about what their capacity is, and I think is really important so that you can set up that productive mentorship relationship.
Good advice. Bonnie, what was your timeline for the transition from a 5-hour work week to a full 40-hour work week?
Yeah, so I was paying off grad school loans, so what I was doing in the beginning mostly had to do with just how could I make my basic ends meet. So I was working 3 jobs. I was working on a farm, I was working for a green design business, and I was working 5 hours a week for this co-op in the early stages. For the first, from 2000, I probably wasn't getting any pay at all in 2007. In 2008, I think I started fundraising a little bit, and so I was getting about, paid for 5 hours a week. And then looking at our timeline for development, when we started getting ready to move into, I would say in the 300 to 500 member owner phase is when we really needed someone to be more full-time. So before, I would say around when there was 400 member owners is when I got hired to be full-time project manager. And so that was perfect because we were planning, usually for capital campaigns, you launch them around 600 member owners. So that allowed me to be full-time, focus on gearing up our member owner numbers from 400 to 600, and then to prepare and hire and oversee member loan campaign coordinator from the community. And so I think around, it really depends on your co-op's development timeline, but probably around 400 member owners you should be thinking about and looking at, what is the role that we need? For some folks, it might not be a project manager, it might be a outreach manager or a membership manager that focuses, really on membership campaign building, depending on the skill set on your board. And then I've heard from Stuart and from others that some co-ops have this kind of outreach coordinator early on, and by the time they get to building decisions, they hire someone as a project manager that really focuses on building decisions up until they hire their general manager.
That is a nice segue to the next question. Are there other employees involved besides the project manager and the general manager, or is everything else done by contract workers and consultants for things like marketing?
That's a great question.
I think that question might be project specific. I can tell you for us that we did have some marketing support closer to our opening. That was maybe 1.5 years or 2 years out at that point. After I'd come on in 2011, and at that time we had some about 20 hours a week and support that got us really probably about 90 days. We ran with probably 1.5 positions until about 90 to 120 days before opening.
But I would say in the earlier organizing phases, your budget is incredibly limited, as you all know. And so what we tried to do was make sure that there was a month overlap between project manager and general manager. And so I decided it was really important for me to get married and go on a honeymoon. So in our case, I actually wasn't able to have that transition overlap with Michael. So I hired a project manager who was on for about 2 months because she overlapped with me for a little while and with Michael for a little while to bridge that gap. So ideally, for your co-op, you won't have to have that short gap stop, and you can go directly from someone that's in that project manager role to your general manager. And what I've been sharing with a lot of the startups that we're coordinating monthly calls with in part of Neighboring Food Co-op Association is that the earlier you can get your GM in place, the better, because they, Michael had the skill set to hire the first staff, put some of these things in places, and also had the ability to whip together a quick member loan campaign to fund that. He realized that even though we had raised $800,000, the co-op needed a couple $100,000 more. So, but when you're at that phase where you have a general manager hired and you have your store plans are out in the community, it's much easier to pull off a member loan campaign than it was in the early stages of organizing. So having a GM in place earlier rather than later, and you trying to tackle all that stuff, it's much less efficient.
Well, this next question is a whole webinar, but maybe you can give a couple quick pointers. This is exciting but rather overwhelming for those of us who are just starting a membership drive and seeing if we can get enough interest. Any suggestions for keeping people involved during the long wait for the store? I don't know if they mean by that the people that are helping with the drive or the members that have joined early on.
I guess, just a couple thoughts, and I'm not clear on the specifics of the question, but I think, again, getting back to a couple points we touched on, having the right people involved so that people feel like their time is being well spent and that the project is moving forward will pay huge dividends in sort of retaining that energy to move the project forward and people remaining invested in the project. There's nothing worse. I think we've all been to ineffectively led or meetings where nothing, where you leave feeling like nothing was accomplished. And so you really want to try to avoid that so that you can retain that energy to move the project along.
And I would just say too, early on, it seems like there's a lot of pressure. I often get this question from startups. People want our site location. We're feeling so stressed out about it. Should we just tell them, we aren't in the right phase? And this kind of desire and your member owners or the folks that are like, I will join when you do X, Y, and Z, feeling this big pressure to meet those demands. But the reality is that the best thing that you can do is communicate that you're being responsible, that you're using due diligence in your process, that you're hiring the best consultants that you can hire. And so being able to communicate that regularly, it's not sexy. It's not as sexy as saying that we're going to carry this kind of organic milk on the shelves. But it's really important, especially when you go to the capital campaign and when you go to go to funders to support your project, that you're showing them clearly and that you're communicating regularly with the community with what you're doing. So I'm not talking monthly. I'm talking bi-monthly, as you get further along in development. And during the member loan campaign, weekly. So having regular communications with the community is really important because for me, I follow every startup across the country that I can because I'm so excited. And the startups that really seem successful to me are the ones that are communicating regularly and figuring out how to frame their message. Like, why is it so exciting that we have 300 member owners? Because it means we're going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And doing regular communications is absolutely crucial because radio silence means that people start wondering what you're doing, and then they'll start putting pressure on you, like, we just want to know about the building. Why aren't you doing X, Y, and Z? So if you communicate regularly, you can stop some of the. You can make people feel like you're being responsible and help increase your membership base. But in terms of membership campaigns, I think that's a whole other webinar that would be really fun to do because we haven't talked about that.
That's really good advice. The communications, keeping people informed frequently goes a long ways to keeping people a little bit happier while they're waiting. We're running a little late on time, but I'm going to try to squeeze in a couple more here. And I'm going to read this one, but I'm not necessarily asking you to answer it. How do we find a great set of consultants? Recommendations? Would you share your consultant contact information? I would suggest that this is a better question that you contact either Michael Bonney or somebody here at Food Co-op Initiative, and we do offline. We can make some recommendations. I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, I would say contact Food Co-op Initiative. They are like the convening, what is that called, clearinghouse for all this stuff. So that's actually who I contacted back in the day. So I would do the same because the consultants have changed. A lot of the consultants we worked with are no longer working in the same roles. So I think contact FCI.
Yes, please do. We're here for that. And final question, Bonnie, did your role include fundraising, and how did you find the funding to hire a project manager?
That's a great question. A lot of my work was fundraising early on, and that, you know, when I talked about the planning timeline being an extra year or so than it needed to be, it was me having one-on-one coffee shop conversations with people in the community and saying, we need to raise, I had clarity that we needed to raise $10,000 for a market study or whatever it was. And so I had, I asked around for the steering committee, I said, who do you know? And from that, I started having, I probably had 15 or 20 coffee shop meetings with people in the community and saying, this is what we're doing, this is our early vision, how do we get funding from the community? Because I was really clear when I started looking for grants that was not the way to do it. And of course there were no member owners in place, so you can't use member equity. So I spent the early time figuring out how to fundraise for the market study and for the, you know, doing actually a comprehensive feasibility study with CDS Consulting Co-op, which included preliminary store design and some board leadership development stuff. And so it was, we ended up raising, I believe, like $35,000 to $40,000 from the community, from community grants, or community groups. Like, so the graduate school I just graduated from, I was like, wouldn't you want to contribute to this project? It's being led by a graduate alum. And I approached the local community college, and I approached the city of Keene, which I would actually say is a great suggestion for all of you, because you're going to have to be working with your local government at multiple stages along the development when you go to get your plans approved, etc. So it's nice to start that relationship early. So we actually spent a ton of time, you know, in that first year. We went to 4 city council meetings to ask for a $5,000 appropriation for the feasibility study that I only learned about because I had a coffee shop conversation with the city planner, and she was like, hey, you know, communities have contingency, you know, they have plans where if you don't, like, kind of emergency slush fund, and so if it's not used at the end of the year, they put it into community projects. Why don't you ask if you can do that for the co-op? So that was just one example of how of where we got our money from. So I think we got it from 5 or 6 different sources, and a lot of communities have like community development groups that are kind of not many people knows about them. So a couple of groups like that contributed $5,000 to $10,000 for that early startup phase. And then once we had the market study done, saw that our co-op it was projected to be viable, we started focusing on membership, getting membership numbers up, and further along development, we used member equity to pay for the project manager role. And I operated on a very, very incredibly slim budget and got community donations for food when we did events, etc. So just, I think it's, you know, even though it takes a little bit more time, getting those initial funds from the community, it was really good in terms of setting the foundational relationship building that ended up being important when we went back to the city later in the development phase. They already knew who we were. We had presented to their city council, and there's great examples of some community presentations that on the FCI website that help you much earlier than I was ready to put together a solid vision and talk about the larger co-op community and what the potential impact of a food co-op could be in your community. So being able to share that message in those community meetings was really helped put together that initial funding for in the very early stages of development.
Well, I think our time is running out, and I think we've covered almost all of the questions. So thank you so much, Bonnie and Michael,
Yeah.
telling us about your co-op and the great advice you shared as well. Mary, do you have any closing comments? If not, we hope to see you next time around. Thank you for joining us.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for having us.